Chris Endersby. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the next chapter. We've never met before, but I
No.
have been very looking forward to speaking to you because we have quite a lot in common, and also I shall explain why. But this conversation is coming at such a perfect time. So welcome to the next chapter.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, so Chris, as ever, we start with the prologue and we
Yeah.
start with where you grew up. Now, you grew up in North Kent and you say you were close enough to civilization without experiencing any of it. So you enjoyed a bit of time to yourself, perhaps, I'm wondering.
Yeah. So where we lived was one of these kind of manufactured villages, country villages from the kind of 1960s. So um, great opportunity as a young child playing in woods, everything kind of very safe. But yet in your teenage years, you realize that there's one bus a week. You know, you can't get anywhere. You're a mile away, miles away from everybody. So I think it was idyllic in primary school years, but perhaps increasingly frustrating when you want a bit of independence, etc. But yeah, so
Yeah.
very good, very outdoorsy,
Yeah,
and
how
very
how
relaxed.
lovely. Yeah, how lovely. And when you were at school, like
Mm,
what kind of people, you said you wanted to do enough not to get noticed. So you did,
yes,
so it sounds like you didn't really necessarily want to be in the limelight.
I think that's true. I think also I went to a grammar school, and even then there was still some pressure associated with that experience. Now I think it's on steroids, but back then there was still a degree of pressure, and I was acutely aware, and still am to this day, because I feel very blessed that some of my closest friends now are my school friends from there. When you are surrounded by a few really, really, really smart people, you do realize
Yeah.
that actually you can burn all day. uh, so I think that was, and also my parents were teachers. So I think there was a degree of not wanting to bring kind of embarrassment or attention onto myself and
Mm,
my kind of schooling experience. So
yeah.
therefore, top third, doing enough, never,
Yeah.
perhaps top of the class, but yeah, wouldn't have wanted to get into trouble either. I was very not half as rebellious then as I am now.
Oh, that's
So
good.
I wouldn't have wanted to incur the wrath of parental or teacher displeasure at that side, I'm sure.
And I think that's exactly the right way round, to get on with it at school and then be a rebel for the rest of your life. I think that sounds really good. And do you have brothers and sisters?
I do. I have one older sister,
Okay.
so 2 years older,
Okay.
which I think meant at school you could always tell the kids who had older sisters, and I
Yeah.
presume the same as girls have older brothers, because you can actually talk to the opposite sex, as it were. You can seem to make friends without those divides, because it was a boys' school. But yeah, so my sister was a few years, or is a few years older.
Okay. I went to a grammar school as well, so I completely understand where you are coming from. And yeah, you do realize, and they're like, oh, so clever. But anyway, and you said you were a little bit of an old soul, so you were looked after. And you're still friends with your friends today, but you sort of very much looked after them.
Yeah, I think at one stage my nickname was Dad. I don't know if that's something to be proud about or embarrassed about, but it's out there now. So I think everybody, and I think still the same is true in our friendship groups and close friends at work or those things. That everybody kind of performs a role. You wear a hat, don't you? You find your differentiation and your niche within the friendship group.
Mm.
I think being a bit paternalistic was probably quite true back then. So was more of the kind of carer and the looking after the group of friends rather than the crazy one out front.
Yeah, I think that sounds like quite a good role to be, though. You're sort of sometimes, again, it's a little bit like we were saying, like keeping a little bit in the background, not being at that. I say this as I've got two sons and always
Mm.
talking to them now about the importance of just not always, you don't have to be the one. You can always just, it's absolutely fine to just stand back a little bit. And that's obviously what you did.
I think so, yeah. And I've actually, it's interesting that I have two sons myself now. And I always say I've got my dad and my mother-in-law as my two children. Uh,
That's brilliant.
I've actually described it like that because they play mini rugby. And
Right.
when people like to say, that's my son there and that's my mother-in-law's grandchild over there. So, but the eldest one, he is like my father incarnate. It's it's
Wow.
it's it's spooky to see his mannerisms, his demeanor. He'll stand there. My father wasn't a 19th century policeman, but that way that they stand with their hands
Oh,
behind their
yeah.
back,
Yes.
slightly leaning forwards. Well, my son will stand like that naturally,
Wow.
and so it's a very interesting thing to see. And he shares a lot of the attributes of my dad, and
Oh.
I'm so relieved because my dad was very practical. He was like he was a teacher, but he did both sort of maths but computing. So he was on the verge of those things coming through, and very practical. So I was hoping, because I'm not practical, I think my total extent of DIY was holding a torch in the rain. So I can do that very well. But my son appears to be embodying some of that more practical, hands-on capabilities from my father. So at least I still will get my DIY done in the future.
Well, exactly. And you can still be the dad in your dad role, but you can I love that. And so, and forgive me if I haven't got about the timing. So I know that this was really important to so much. Was it actually sort of around the GCSEs, but your best friend got really poorly. And this was actually, it actually sort of set you on a path as well, seeing your best friend poorly.
That's right, yeah. So at school, a very close friend of mine, Martin Le Bouchardier, he got very, very ill, well, as it proved to be terminally ill, when we were studying GCSEs. And that was the first time I met a social worker and knew that those people existed. Both my parents were teachers. So, and I don't know whether this is true, this is my lived experience, but I think if your parents are business people, you're perhaps more likely to go into the business world. If your parents are teachers, perhaps, or nurses or GPs, I think it's certainly back then, even if not so much now, I think, your career's aspirations were heavily influenced by, what you knew and the environment you're growing up in. So I think that was a world that's familiar to me, but I knew the one thing I didn't want to do is be a teacher. So finding this other career, which seemed to be allied to it, but yet sufficiently different, because I was and by the way, I'm not at all meaning to trivialize what was going on for Mark, but from my perspective, someone who had a job, picking someone like me up from school and taking them out for a day with their friend who's ill or going to see him in hospital, I thought that's a great job. It's a wonderful. And of course, at that time, I didn't see the other side of social work, which isn't all about, the assistive side of things. But it was that opened my eyes up to doing social work. And then perhaps a segue back to the parental thing, I therefore realized I had to do voluntary work. So then went to volunteer at the local special needs school to us. So yeah, it definitely drew me into that world. And I like to think that something wonderful, therefore, came out of what was otherwise quite a difficult position to be in.
Because that must have been such a traumatic time as well. Again, you don't probably realise it, and you carry on at the time, and I'm sure you understand. I'm the same myself, that now I've got, especially when you've got children yourself, and even if you don't have children yourself, but as an adult, you realise how traumatic that was, and perhaps all the adults they keep it all a lot calmer, but actually, oh my goodness, how awful for your friend, obviously, but also all of you around him.
I think so, and I think that hindsight and reprocessing over the years and reframing things, so you're never quite sure now, that many years on, how you actually felt at the time. But my recollection of it was, though, I found it strangely inspiring and motivating to keep going. The backstory there is that Mark passed away having completed his GCSEs, but completed a lot of the coursework, but before having seen the results of it. So just that sense of keeping going while knowing that, in all likelihood, that you might not see the benefit of those. And he wanted to be a scientist and all these things. So I like to think that it spurred me on in a way that was, positive, as well as dealing with any of the kind of difficulties that came along with that.
Well, he inspired you, obviously.
Exactly.
Yeah. How incredible. And so you decided to go into social work.
I did.
And you went to Bath University. And
I know.
We have discovered we were there at the same time.
We so were, yeah.
I wish we could go back in time now to see if we were both in Swamp together, Chris. That would have just.
Well, I wonder how this conversation would have gone down there.
Exactly. I
wonder.
Yeah, I probably would have been. To be fair, I did used to interview people with anything and pretend to be a journalist. So I probably would have tried interviewing. You'd have clear off. Who's this crazy girl?
Well, we're sat on the curb eating marmaris outside Swamp. Exactly.
Yeah, thinking we knew everything that was right in the world, and actually realised didn't know anything at all. And so you went to Bath University and you did sociology, but you also, because I remember that there was that you could do sort of social work with it. And is that
That's
how
right?
you did? Yeah. And then so you then went into social work. So you obviously knew exactly what you wanted to do, and you'd been volunteering. So you at this stage, your path was kind of pretty clear.
Yeah, the degree was. I think there was only possibly 3 degrees in the country that I could have been eligible to apply to. I'm sure this is very, very different now. At the time, the minimum qualifying age was 22 to become a social worker. So you had to do a 4-year degree or take a year out. So there weren't that many choices. There aren't that many degrees in themselves that at that time combined qualification as a social worker with a degree. So a lot of people, you didn't need a social work degree at that stage to do the job. So the choice was relatively limited. But I mean, what a great choice Bath was to go to. It was also a great choice because, as you may recall, we were surrounded by people who were doing what we call the hard sciences.
Oh, yeah.
Or mechanical or chemical engineering, who would have their 25, 30, 35 hours, maybe lectures a week.
Yeah, yeah.
And those of us who seem to get by on a diet of 8 to 10 hours lectures.
Yeah.
So,
well, you said you were surrounded by clever people at the grammar school, and then you went to Bath, and I was there in doing the same path as you, because everyone was like really clever. And my dad used to call I did sociology as well, and my dad used to call it socializingology, because he could never actually quite work out what. And to be honest, because I still don't know really what I did there, but no. I loved it. But yeah, you're right. And people, it was very much they were doing languages and business and like really clever stuff.
They were, yeah. Which I think social work as a degree at that time, I think it was just below farming and fisheries as its academic input, and we didn't do farming and fisheries at Bath. So yeah, it was one that I distinctly remember everybody ridiculing me, because I think our statistics class was something like take 10 blades of grass and find the average or something like that. So.
But look what it was preparing you for, because then the work that you did, and so for you to go, so you were 22, so you went into child protection teams. So I mean, to be fair, that is incredible work.
Yeah. So I did whilst I was at university, I did 2 placements, one in adult care, adult services, and one in children's services. So very blessed to have done both of those, which gave me some insight. Then I moved back home for a very short time, literally back home for about 3 months, and found a job in KCC, firstly down in Canterbury, and then latterly in Gravesend. And I think it was really in the Gravesend team in Kent where I was very, very fortunate to be surrounded by a really close-knit team, some of whom I'm still in touch with, obviously. Given I started very young, a lot of them have either retired or moved on to other careers. But yeah, it was very, very well looked after. I think it would have been highly unusual then, and probably still is, for a young person to go into social work, particularly a young guy as well. So I probably ended up with more than my fair share of the naughty teenagers and the kind of troubled families at that end of things. But I mean, we're blessed now that I still get to get some involvement in social work through other things that we do, which we can perhaps talk about later. But it struck me then that at least we had time to get to know the young people, to get to go out with them, to really spend some quality time together. Whereas I think increasingly now social workers are managing risk, not managing relationships, which is a shame. And so I don't know that I would have enjoyed the job quite as much now as I did back then.
And you did enjoy it, did you? And I mean, presumably you were going in. So you were going in to see if there was, say, a problem. You would go in and say, for example, if we took a teenager, take a teenage boy, and you knew that the boy was in trouble, then you would. Is that what you would do if it was mainly the teenagers say who were children who were in trouble, or was it that there was a fear that they were in trouble themselves, as in an unsafe environment? Or could it be the two, I suppose?
Could have been either. I mean, the duty desk is a literally you don't know what's coming on the phones in those stage. I suppose it's more and more electronic now probably, but you would literally get a call. It could be anything. So you'd be doing short-term social work in the main, working with cases probably 2 to 3 months, and then for those that required it, moving them onto a long-term care team or a long-term kind of community team. So it could be anything. It could be teenagers who are at risk of crime and exploitation and being very vulnerable, or it could be teenagers who are posing risks and for whom might be better dealt with within an adolescent team. Also, at that time, it's not crazy to look back at it, but it's just very different how it worked. So at the time as well, we were involved in the evidential gathering process around child abuse activities as well. So working with the police to gather evidence, so interviewing, victims and therefore potential survivors of different forms of abuse as well. So yeah, quite a wide variety of circumstances. And then having done that for about 3 years, I then moved through different roles within social work, but still within children's services. I used to say, and probably, I hope not now, but I used to have the most unpopular job ever all the time. So, and again, I have to be careful because a lot of these topics are really quite serious. But, so when I say some of these things, I'm not for a moment meaning to
No, I completely understand.
sound flippant about them. But so the time when I was doing social work and teaching social work more latterly, it was all sort of Victoria Columbia. There were a very number of hugely serious cases which came to the public attention, which meant social work as a profession, probably more so than today, was one that was very Marmite in the view of people that you didn't know. So it was a love-hate thing, and everybody thought it was a wonderful thing to do, or how could you possibly do such a job? Either leaving children to suffer harm or removing children from otherwise safe environments. That's one of those no-win professions. Then I think it was about 2001, Kent had maybe 150 asylum seeker refugee families total.
My God.
So I got involved with the asylum unit and dealing with children and young people there. I think within a year and a half we had 1,500.
Oh my goodness.
And then all of a sudden, having started setting up reception centres and those pieces, then the moral panic kind of moved towards asylum and migration. Moving forward, and I know we'll have to come backwards in a moment maybe, but then I thought at some point later that I had the opportunity to join financial services at a time when everyone thought the bankers were very boring, respectable members of society before the crash. But having then moved, then of course bankers became the most hated people, I think, for a while. So it does seem to moral panic has followed me, and I did feel as well it was going from kind of quite domestic to international to global issues. So I kind of thought, surely NASA, SpaceX should be my next move, and I can have some galactic level moral panic follow my journey.
Oh my goodness! I mean, what? And also, you were a young guy. That was a lot what you were seeing, and presumably you were seeing things that you'd never seen before. And just keeping there, I mean, and obviously, I'm really conscious as well the decision from your friend. So you obviously, you'd been hugely affected, and then you were working in this in very traumatic. In very, very traumatic at a very young age. And it is a very big question, but what if you can think back, and now you are a dad yourself, if you think back to then, and obviously there's a big fear at the moment of, I think, especially as a mum of boys, there's a lot of anger, and everyone says it's worse now than it's ever been. Do you think that's true? Or if you go back to that time, and I appreciate you were very different, you weren't a dad then, do you think problems are very similar in different ways, or do you think it has got a lot worse when it comes to young people?
I think obviously the human condition, I think, is very similar still. So how it affects us, and what it does. And I think back then, as of now, so for example, if you look at young people and kind of self-harm and suicide and all those pieces, the characteristics are still entirely relatable. But I think the social phenomenon, the broader phenomenon, are completely different now to what they were then. And I think, the comparator pressures that people find, I think that then there was perhaps a view of, well, if I speak from my own side, masculinity that wasn't perhaps, would today be frowned upon, I think, in many ways, but at least there was one. And I think now there almost seems to be an absence of what that means to be, masculine or to be so I think that things have changed massively, sometimes for the better, but I don't think in all ways we didn't have any of the social media challenges and pressures that young people do today. And you're acutely aware of comparison. So, as I said, I think how people responded, the difficulties people faced, the coping strategies, I think very, very similar.
Yeah.
But the pressures that people are under and the kind of, going back before social work time, as I'm sure you could, like when you shut your front door at home, if the pressures were outside, they were outside.
Yeah.
Or if life was difficult at home, when you left home, you shut the door the other way. And I think those boundaries now are much more permeable. And if you're having a tough time at school, it is almost certainly with you at home. And if home life and family life is difficult, it now follows you into other places a lot more.
That's interesting. Very interesting. And it's a bit like what you were saying earlier about like your parents were both teachers, so you're like more likely to do that. Whereas, and again, it's perhaps a good side, the positive side, that your mind is much more open because we can see. But then there's also this pressure that everyone's supposed to be everything, and you're supposed to be a county champion at tennis alongside a straight A student, and meanwhile volunteer at the same time. And it's just all totally ridiculous. But it also, and we will move on, it also, that some of those moments when you're with, like say for example, just using the troubled teenager, there must have been some very rewarding moments for you.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I have, as I say, I think they call it kind of gallows humor, don't they? Where you sort of have moments of tragedy that, I don't remember who it was that said this, which is probably quite poor of me, but it's that, you know, life when zoomed in is a tragedy, life when zoomed out is a comedy, you know. So it's that
I get it. Amazing
perspective on things. But yeah, I think some of my, you know, formative experiences, some of which are very celebrating and very proud, some of which, and I won't say the person's name, but I remember dealing with someone whose father was quite a notorious drug dealer. I happened to also live in the same town. And then when I bought my first house, I realised that he was the carpet fitter booked in. So
did he recognise you? Did he know you?
I had to make myself absent, but the trouble is that the name is quite familiar.
Well, it is. So, it is an unusual name.
That was the trouble. Or when I met another client who, in a very different, or parent of a child who in very different and difficult circumstances still. In Asda's, I remember having a frozen chicken thrown at me across the aisle.
Oh no!
So, so some very notable experiences. But I also, you know, remember some wonderful young people who, you know, I encountered along the way, and I learned so much from those experiences. And as I mentioned, was very blessed to be surrounded by a supportive team, both in social services and in the police. And I get the sense that both at school and in my early working life that there seemed to be somewhat of a turning point in a lot of the kind of professionalization of a lot of these jobs. So I think teaching, when we were probably first at school, was more vocation-led, profession second.
How fascinating how you saw all these different vocations, like police, social work. Obviously, you've seen it with your parents as well with teaching, but then you did take a step over, and I love this. When I asked you this in the notes beforehand, you were like, this is a lot gone on here, so we're going to have to discuss it. But what I know is then you moved you went, like you touched on earlier, into finance. So this is, now we're going into the business world to bring you to today's. But what I would say is, from what you've said so far, I'm sure you gathered like so much experience to give you so much empathy, which you can't forget what you'd seen. So that must have been, that's a very unusual kind of bedrock as such to take into then the business world.
So you know, like you have to deal with potholes as well as road deaths. You know, so if you have transport budget, do you fill in a pothole or do you put crash barriers on a motorway? You know, so those kind of difficult decisions. Whereas of course in finance, certainly at the time, this is before balanced scorecard, you know, you probably have 2 or 3 key indicators, one of which is obviously bottom line profit. So it simplifies a lot of things. You know, you don't have these contentions, you don't have these trade-offs. It's much more straightforward. It's much more predictable. It's much more contained. Things like freedom of information requests. So if a public sector organisation wastes, and I use the word wastes advisedly, but misspends, say, £1,000, people are well within their rights to write in and say, what happened to that money? Where is it? Why did you spend that? In a large commercial organisation, you could lose £100,000, you know, £1 million, and no one would know.
Oh my God.
And there would be no right of redress to understand why as a shareholder. So just the level of scrutiny, the level of transparency, all those things, very, very different. But still, the common theme was I was working with people who, you know, in ambiguous circumstances, trying to get a job done, come together as a team, understanding professional differences, understanding different relationships. So there's a lot of similarities. and a lot of similarities just due to working in large, complex organizations.
Absolutely. So just so we're clear, so you were working when you made the leap from social working. So not, so you were dealing with budgets at this stage. What was your first job in finance? So because you worked with some big companies, didn't you? Like JP Morgan, like it was huge. But so what actually was that job then that you did?
So I was doing project management.
Right.
I was working in technology and operations. So helping launch new products,
Wow, so very
or
different.
rationalize existing services, absolutely very different. But in KCC, where I was previously, I'd been working on very large projects, commissioning projects, overseeing vendors. So before moving, I had the opportunity to do an MBA course at Imperial. And so that had opened my mind, opened my network, opened my relationships to go well beyond the public sector. So I had a bit of an exposure in those 2 years on that part-time executive MBA program to a wide range of different skills, a wide range of different knowledge sets than what I perhaps would have encountered as a social worker. Right. So, I mean, the thing we haven't spoken about is I probably spent an unhealthy amount of time working and studying during those years. I could never have done that now with family and all those pieces. So a large part of it was challenging myself, seeing if I could do things. I think it might be different now, I'm not sure, but certainly back in the time that I'm talking about, the commercial sector had at least the perception of operating at a level above the public sector. It was deemed to have the most up-to-date methodology, more resources, better technology, which was becoming important even then. And therefore, if you were going to make it as a manager, the place to prove yourself was the private sector, not the public sector. So I think that challenge of could I survive, could I cope? And I found the thing that made a difference to me there was the same thing that made a difference to me when I started out in social work, was that I was very blessed to have a few key people around me who really took me under their wing and helped me through it, and were very generous with their time, generous with their relationships and network and knowledge. And I think always, if it wasn't for other people being so generous, I think I probably would have floundered and failed very early.
But obviously, well, there's a common theme there, though, isn't there? Because you're the common denominator. So presumably, this is me using my amateur psychology, Chris, which I use often on this podcast, and it comes out.
It's all good.
But the fact that you obviously love to learn, and I think when somebody sees someone is truly trying and wants to learn, that attracts, you those people, because they themselves were like that. And I think that's when you end up with people who are very helpful, rather than if you just sort of expect to know it all or whatever it is. It's very hard for anyone to teach somebody like that. So it's and again, this is a big question, but in this, so you worked for, say, really big companies. So I know that, as I say, I know it was JP Morgan. What other companies did you work for?
So KPMG,
wow,
and therefore UBS, Barclays. So yeah,
wow.
Big companies.
Yeah. And did you think, having spent all that time in the public sector, did they have it worked out in the financial sector? Did they hold the magic key to these big projects and, working things out when they've got all the money that they can afford to lose at times?
I think as well, in the context that, as I said, shortly after I joined, we had the financial crash. And therefore it's quite evident they didn't all have it right, wasn't it? So I think it's hard for me to sit here now to suggest that they did. But in a strange way, I found that quite comforting. Because in a strange way, I found that actually these large organizations are just as fallible, just as human as the public sector. So again, I'm not meaning to trivialize, because I know it had awful human impact upon a vast number of people. But strangely, just accepting the fact that these complexities and challenges and shifts in, society are massive and are affecting private companies in the same way as they are public sector companies. And I think the thing that was struck me by the similarity, though, was if you have a large bureaucracy, it doesn't matter to some extent whether it's public or private, that has a certain overhead around it, governance, steering committee, levels of decision making, cross-functional decision making, needing to consult with a vast number of people. I think perhaps the main difference for me from public to private was in public sector, you generally knew who the politicians were because they were politicians. They were councillors, MPs. And of course, in the private sector, you still have as many politicians, but they're not called politicians.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Exactly. And it goes back actually to what you were speaking about earlier with teenagers. But basically, we are all human, and we all feel that we react, and we are very similar. We're all unique, but very similar as well. So it goes to show, isn't it? It might not be voters, but actually you've got shareholders, or you've got, and no one wants to fail, do they? Or no one wants to feel like they're not everyone wants to feel like they're doing a good job. So you were there, and then you eventually began Firestarter. So Firestarter is all about brands and encouraging people, and mainly businesses, forgive me if I get this wrong, to help them develop their brands. So how did this come about from where you were to there?
Okay, so and with a lot of, I always say that I'd be the worst person to ever do a careers talk.
Well, you'd have a lot of chapters.
Because it's never been very intentional. It's all been a lot of happenstance and a lot of, grasping at opportunity rather than planned, considered strategic moves. So in between working in financial services and setting up Firestarter, I'd made quite a lot of other shifts. So part of that was kind of almost going back to a bit more of a, not necessarily public sector, but certainly public value work. So I was working on, still doing project change management, but outside of financial services. So one of the projects I'm most proud about having been involved with was within the rail industry. There's services now which improve experiences of people who have accessibility needs on the trains, because it used to be shocking. I mean, direly shocking. I now just think it's not quite awful. So I was involved in an app launch there for staff and passengers. So I was really enjoying applying some of that broad set of skills to something a bit more perhaps a social and personal value. I then also did a lot of work around coaching, mentoring, counselling, those things too. Going into lockdown, I was volunteering as a appropriate adult in police stations, which was quite an experience too. And I'd known my co-founder in Firestarter for quite some time by then from working with her in financial services, but completely different background to me. I probably spent far, far too long with my head buried in a book. She set up her first business, I think, when she was 21.
Wow.
Didn't go to university, worked in businesses instead. And I saw that what she had already built by that point in Firestarter was hugely powerful, had so much psychological depth to it, had so much potential rigor, had so much applicability, and the opportunity to do more by coming together than we were both doing on our own with our own businesses struck us as worthwhile giving it a go. So for a time being, we kept our own businesses. We just worked together, did that for a few months, brought other people in as well, people that I knew who did websites and other things, and realized that, yes, that was something very special. And when we look back now, and I think it's become more popular, but the idea that, brand would all be about psychology, I think it speaks for itself now. They're both about influencing how you want people to think, how you want them to feel, and how you want them to behave. But certainly that felt quite reassuring and different and fresh for us to bring those two domains together and make that more accessible to people on similar journeys to us. So not big corporates that I was used to, but much smaller, earlier stage businesses.
So by this stage, were you working, I'm going to use the term freelancer, I don't mean like that, but so you weren't tied to one particular bank, you had kind of come out of that and you were working sort of independently as such.
Correct.
I use the journalism
contractor.
That's
it.
the right word, isn't it? Yeah. So you're working as a contractor, and you met your business partner, you'd met her through the different jobs.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And so It is. I think that's amazing because you really, and the reason why, and when I said at the beginning of this, so I obviously, I'm a journalist, and then I have my books and my podcast site, and I am like a complete in my next chapter world. I am a complete beginner in many things, and it's come to my attention, Chris, that branding is a real, is something that I absolutely have not got right. But it's all part of the learning, isn't it? Because you don't wake up knowing everything, as you've said about this continuous learning. And so I've been listening to lots and lots about branding at the moment. And what I'm understanding is, and forgive me because I'm a new beginner, but actually when people say about brand, because again, you can get a little bit of I personally, and I don't know how the listener feels, can get a little bit of an ick because it's like we see it on social media and it's like, oh, a brand, and actually you can become a little bit distrusting. And I think we all see it because we know really well-known celebrities and it's like their brand, and actually you can be like, it become a bit cynical because it's like, actually that's not particularly some we know it's not always that genuine, and I know that through my journalism world as well. But actually what I'm learning is a brand is actually, if you look at it in a different way, authentically, it's actually your reputation. It's who you are much more. And that's kind of the seed of it a lot. And so this goes back into all your psychology and when you were working with people, with the teenagers back then, and how all of that. I can totally understand how you have come into this, even though before I started to learn about, I would never have understood that. So it's fascinating. No. So is that what's? Sorry, I'm rambling on now. But is this what you do then? So it's getting to the root of you working with potentially businesses, but people, so that they can get what they're trying to do out in a really clear way.
Absolutely, yes. So I think brand is just another word really for identity. Yeah. Think about it like that. I suppose that's the kind of simplest translation for it, really. And it's also one that weirdly we have been doing for longer than we might wish to give ourselves credit for. So, whether that would be, kind of branding on cattle to demonstrate ownership, so it does have genuinely historical reasons. And even I think, though, up to the point that certainly I was growing up, companies might just have a letterhead with their name and address on, and that would be enough,
Yeah.
because you would buy from who you knew. Yeah. So you would go to your local high street, or you would look in your phone book or your yellow pages, and I don't know, Aardvark cleaning services would do very well, because it was kind of familiarity, proximity. It was very easy, and therefore, the challenge to differentiate and the challenge to stand out and the challenge to demonstrate your unique value, what you can do in the way that nobody else can do to satisfy your customer, is that I think the demands and expectations upon businesses and organizations more broadly now is so much greater, because you've got to cut through so much more noise. You got to, you're competing often globally, or, across, just as like being an online seller, it is a physical, seller. So it's just massive complexity in the market. And I think what a brand therefore needs to do just becomes so much more. It needs to become so much more multifaceted. So one of the things that I was so impressed with, the formula that Mickey had already had by then, we call it our DARE formula, to me had such psychological and to some extent sociological depth that I was really hooked by it, whereas Mickey had created it through years of trial and error and practice through working branding. So for that, the D stands for differentiation. So that's what makes you uniquely valuable. And I think everybody has that.
Yeah.
And almost always it's already sort of there.
Yeah.
It might not be recognized. It might not be, front and center with what you're saying, but it's rarely that differentiation comes from outside. It's that thing that you do, the skills you possess, the knowledge or whatever. So then authenticity. And I think that that's really important, because if you want to build a trusted return business and, sticky business, then you need to be doing so in an authentic and honest and straightforward way. And it means that you're more likely to get the customers that you want to get. They're more likely to work with the suppliers they want to get. I think we die a little bit inside. I want to be the next Apple or Nike or those things. So then you've got resonance. I think that in this day and age as well, people understand that where you have choice, that the relationship is based not just upon, do you provide relevant services? Do you provide something that I want? But also, do you do that in a way that connects emotionally with me? Yeah. And therefore, it's not, I think, enough now just to tick logical boxes of products and features. That for a lot of B2B, even, there need to be this resonant emotional connection. And the last thing to say is that a lot of brands, we find there's something great, but it's so inconsistent and incoherent that people don't really know whether they're coming and going. So if you get that differentiation, if you can become authentic, if you can become resonant and you express that every touch point, then you get this sort of secret sauce, which is to become known, to become trusted, to become liked, and to become remembered. So it's a significant challenge now and weight that the brand has to do. And just one other thing, if it's okay, I think that also brand, the way I describe it, it doesn't work technically in this way, but I think it's a good analogy is that think about marketing. I would say that sits almost on your profit and loss of a business. It's quite technical. If I spend £1,000, I would expect to see this kind of result. So what they'd call return on investment. Yeah. And it's quite short term and it's quite tactically driven. Whereas brand is more something that sits on your balance sheet. So you've got to build it over time. It's like an asset, you've got to contribute to it. And when you come to sell a company, then the brand might be the thing that's most valuable. And there's a lot of cases where upon disposal, it's the brand that is being bought, not the shop or the stock or the customer base. So brand requires faith. It requires a belief and an investment in the longer term. And what you're building is something that is of value, which needs to be nurtured. And if you do that and you invest there, then your marketing becomes more efficient and, so you get other saves. But it is a tricky one for people to get their heads around as to why it's so important and why it's a long-term, investment, not a short-term fix.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you say B2B, so that's obviously business to business. So you tend to deal, like you touched on earlier, smaller businesses. But obviously, again, it's individual people, isn't it? They're creating, and so the next chapter is all about people, whatever area of their life, starting next chapters. But so if someone's listening to this and they think, okay, I want to, deep down, I really want to say be a gardener, just say something. I picked it up the top of my head, but I suppose it's like what makes you pick that person? And maybe they have a gardening business, so it's not an individual, but it's like, but I really, so for using myself, I am going to use myself as an example. So I've been a journalist for all these years. I write books and I have a podcast, but I suppose where I need to really, and this is the work I'm doing at the moment, and I do know what I'm trying to do, but it's having the more you chisel down to actually what you're trying to do, the bigger the clarity comes through, isn't it? And it's articulating it. If I've got that right, it's being able, and it's having that one. So, for example, me listening to you, I've got a real feel for you from back in when you were at school, which is why I do these podcasts to go all the way back to the beginning. And your lovely friend, there's a real empathy, and you clearly want to help people and actually to live lives that get the best out of their lives and inspire and sort of think that, it is possible. And that started, that key raw moment was with your friend and how he carried on working before he, before he knew he was going to die. And look what he did. I mean, that's just unbelievable. And so this has carried on through, and you've articulated it, but I suppose it's very hard. We've all got this in us, but it's very hard for us even to know what that is in ourselves, let alone to articulate it. So how does someone get to know what it is in themselves?
Okay, so we're really blessed, I think, that business these days, it's even if you're a solopreneur or you have a one person business, you're very rarely doing it on your own. So a bit like this conversation that we've just gone through, I'm going to learn more about myself through talking about me to you. So it's kind of even though it's my story, it's still going to be revelatory to me, and the questions that you're asking and the perspective that we're going to come to together. So even just this, we're kind of creating something new live, as it were.
Well, great.
And I think that the same is true in branding. So how we tend to approach it is that we would ask, or either we would ask you to ask people that already know you really well. Yeah. What is it about you that they love working with, or what can you do for them that nobody else does? Because sometimes it's in those aha moments that somebody, you know, a close friend or somebody you've worked with in journalism, or, you know, talk to 10 of your favorite podcast, you know, guests.
Yeah.
What was it about how I did this that may be different to all the other podcasts you've been on? Or, you know, so I think it's understanding and having the bravery to talk to others who share your world. Yeah. Because we would say time spent there is probably more fruitful than time spent doing competitor analysis. Yeah.
Definitely.
Not suggesting don't do it, but I always think know thyself, start within.
Yeah.
And I think going on that journey of self-discovery, which you've already honed in on, I think that's the best place to start. Not who do I aspire to be like, or if only I could be like podcast host A or journalist Y. I think what's the best version of myself? And then remember that it has to resonate with others. You know, why would someone else care about that? You know, what does it mean for somebody else? Because perception is still important. And in all industries, you know, there's sort of jargon, and then there's kind of like inward facing conversations. So just trying to put yourself in the shoes, in the headspace of the person who's, you know, you want to do business with. I think just that shift can be quite important, because you're not selling to yourself. It doesn't, you know, your views are important, but it's then how do you put yourself then into, you know, into the receiving mode. And one of the best ways to do that is by engaging and asking with people who know you well, to get a much more rounded view as what's special and what's unique about what you do.
That's fascinating. And also I've heard as well, sometimes even if you ask, and it might be just really close people, even the negative side of things, but sometimes things you don't realize you're thought of, what you think you are thought of isn't necessarily what you're thought of, good and bad.
Exactly. And I think also things like, we do quite a lot of kind of creative thinking. So we would argue that, you know, there's a lot of focus, and rightly so, by the way, on innovation. And, you know, kind of, we see a lot of entrepreneurs who will invest upon very sensible, rational new products, new features. Let's get a website done. What's the very logical journey of a customer through? But sometimes you also need to think, what's the worst possible journey a customer could ever have? What would be, you know, to correct my kids, what would be the it, you know, really drive them crazy? And I think it's sometimes in taking the opposite, and the irrational and the illogical and the playful. And I think that too much stuff these days, I believe, is logic driven, you know, particularly, and this is our thing with AI tools, for example, you know, that you're never going to get where you need to get just asking an AI tool, because it's dealing with what's out there, it's dealing with what's known. These large language models, they're going to like, what's the most likely next word? Yeah, so it's quite probabilistic. You know, we want to be asking quite, you know, random, off the cuff, counterintuitive, maybe even, you know, ask it for the wrong answer. What's the least likely thing to succeed? Because I think it's in those moments and in those perhaps left field views that you're going to come up with something that's going to be really inspiring. So,
and that's almost then the problem that you uniquely can solve. So
absolutely,
so this is
and how you do that uniquely. Absolutely. What is it? You know, is it about what you do? Is it about how you do it? But there'll always be something there that's your unique value proposition. Because let's face it, what's the alternative? The alternative is to be the cheapest. So the alternative is to be the best value for money. And I think particularly young businesses, they can't afford to do that. You know, you can't afford to discount and be the cheapest all the time, because someone with more bargaining power, larger scale, they can, you know, quite happily discount and put you out of business. So I think you've got to aim for value over price. All the time as a young business.
So if somebody was, say, going back to the gardener analogy, that if they were saying, I'd actually like to just be a local gardener, and it might be you drop leaflets through saying I'm starting, even saying I'm new to gardening, I've got a real passion for gardening, I love it, you know, just very briefly, I'd love to come and help you with your garden, or just to give it a tiny bit, which is actually, I think as well, it's one of the reasons I do this podcast, because I've always, so for example, like with me, my writing of my books, I've always found it, and it's so, I mean, being a writer, it's like different things. It takes an awful long time. But by knowing stories of other authors, of how long it took them, it's always encouraged me to keep going. So I always think when you know the story behind people, it's a great inspiration, because we all think everyone, oh, they just automatically became a best-selling author, or but it isn't. So it's having that, I suppose, having the bravery, but also you don't want to just pour your heart out to everyone that you meet either. It's getting that fine line of just letting them know who you are in a very small but poignant way.
I think absolutely. And the way that we might describe that, which I think might help, I don't know, but if you think of like the brand being more like a kind of surface of water, like a lake or something like that, you want people to be able to see themselves in your brand, in what you do.
Yeah.
So the brand isn't just projecting out this view of who you are. You need to make it a little bit more like a mirror, so that people can see enough of themselves in what you do, to relate and connect at that level. Now, if everything is quite confusing and kind of quite all over the place, then imagine looking into a body of water or a lake which is kind of murky and all churned up. Or the surface level is quite disrupted. You're not going to see yourself in there. It's going to look quite confusing, quite dark, quite opaque. So ideally, if you were to think about having that smooth surface of water, because you can see yourself, which is what you want to see, or be able to identify with the brand, but you can also look in. You can see what's under the surface. Does that analogy make sense?
And see how it might help you.
Absolutely, and see the depth there. So, for example, we would even say that gardener, the thing that is likely to make that new business successful initially is probably the story and the narrative of the person, not the business. So what inspires them, what's brought them to gardening, and their love of horticulture or whatever those things are, a little bit about their backstory, which I think is what you were intimating as well, and do that in a way that might connect with the audience. Now, some people won't mind about that. They're just going to look for the cheapest gardener or the most cost-efficient gardener. But I think most businesses want to form relationships. They want that customer who actually, wants to form a positive relationship and have the gardener work with them in a way that's mutually beneficial and, grow together. And, so I think that if you have that story and you try to relate to people and resonate to people and get a relationship-based approach, then as soon as the next gardener comes along who does something for £5 less, or when you go on holiday and then they're going to replace you with somebody else, it just becomes very transactional.
Yeah. And it's that, and it goes back to what we talked about, is like how you make someone feel as well, which is also very important. It's fascinating. And also, just while we're on, I do understand as well, this is where it's good to, especially when you're starting out, to be known for one thing. But when you're in our world, and this is about when you start a next chapter as such, obviously you don't want to lose what you lost before. So for example, I am going to be sorry about this. I'm just going to use myself as an example, and I'm sorry to the listener. But I hope it helps. So for example, I'm a TV journalist, and I love doing sort of very uplifting stories. So that not everyone thinks the news is always bad, and I will always disagree with that, because I see there's some wonderful, hopeful stories. But then I have a podcast, but the key is I've also got my novels. So what my problem is at the moment is, I suppose what it is, it's the theme, or it's who I am through the entire. So you might have a couple of different products, but that's where I am. So that's why it was amazing to have this conversation, Chris. So thank you, and thank you to the listener for bearing with me, because I'm learning so much. But that's what it is, isn't it? It's that common theme through all the work.
Absolutely, it's that golden thread, isn't it? And identifying that. And I think the other thing to say, because we're not very good at setting and we're better at setting our own rules than we are at following them. So just because you become known for something, it doesn't preclude you from doing other things.
Right.
So it's the same as like we tend to work B2B, but just the other day we were working with quite a new fashion brand.
Right.
So it helps people understand kind of who you are, what you're about, but I don't think at any point it precludes you from doing other things as well. And showing the benefit, for example. And I think all of those things feel to me to be quite congruent and related. And I could imagine how journalism maybe is greatly shaped by podcasting informed by journalism, both contribute to storytelling.
Yes.
So,
yes.
I think it's when you can also think that, each one of those, I imagine, hugely benefits from the other two, as it were.
Yeah. Oh, good. Well, I'm glad about that because I was getting a bit. Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you. I feel like I had a little impromptu advice session here, so thank you, and thank you to the
That's all
listener
good.
for staying with us. So, for your to be continued.
Yes.
Now, I love that you wrote down freedom, but I'm guessing more of this because you're obviously helping, and the company's doing so well.
Yeah. So I think, by the way, I don't believe this is attributable to anybody. I thought it was attributable to Nassim Taleb, who's a great commentator, but I think it might be Endersby, but I don't know, but we'll see. But I think if that comes to like nobody truly understands entrepreneurship like a civil servant. Right?
Yeah.
The reason being because if you did understand entrepreneurship, I don't think you would do it.
Yeah.
You have to be slightly, I think, crazy, unhinged, in order to take that leap. So no one tells you when you start off, like we have, like, so for example, HMRC owe us some money. Yeah, no one tells you it's going to take half your working life to get money back from HMRC, or many other things, you know, that could just happen as part of life on that journey. But so I think that there's so much that you have to do. It's so instructive. It's so revealing. It's such a wonderful journey. I think the freedom piece comes because that's what we're all about. We believe that kind of entrepreneurial freedom is the way forwards. It can solve world's problems. That while everybody, public sector, large corporates all have their own, role, an important role to play. I think it's going to be entrepreneurship, particularly in these kind of times of great change, that's going to see us move forwards. And the fact that somebody has to be out there failing, somebody has to be out there, trying and not succeeding in order for us to progress.
Yeah.
So I think that's true. And I'm also really blessed at the minute that I have Firestarter and all those wonderful opportunities I'm working with. I'm very blessed to work with, my colleagues, business partner, clients. But at home, we're doing the foster caring.
Oh, wow.
So I sort of have the only equivalent I can think of there is possibly if your other half is a pub landlord or landlady, and then you live above the pub. And so
oh my goodness,
it's difficult for that not to do. So I find that helps ground things as well, because we have our own 2 and then between 2 and 3 foster children at home as well.
Wow.
So it's a really lovely juxtaposition for life. I find.
Well, I think we'll have to do another episode of this, Chris, if you don't mind, at some stage to talk about with the foster children, because that is something completely different. Well, it's not. It's so tied into. I can understand why you would be, but incredible.
And it's more than happy. I mean, to be honest, I'd be very, very happy to if another episode at some point in the future. Because if anybody is out there thinking about becoming a foster parent, it's something I feel quite passionate about. And obviously, I only have my own journey to call upon. But if that is of interest to anyone who's thinking about that fostering or adoption journey, then that's one that I'm very happy to share.
All right, I'll look at that. I will be back in touch, not just to talk about the Marmaris kebabs at Bath University, but something else as well. Now that's incredible. So for now, for your acknowledgements, who are the people you'd like to thank who have helped you along the way?
I think I'm secretly, not even secretly, clearly, well, it wouldn't be secretly now, would it? I think I am someone who is not made to survive on their own in the world. And I don't think many of us are, if we're truly honest. But I think at every stage in my journey, someone else has helped me along that path. And I always feel a deep sense of gratitude and honouring that help that they've given me so generously. So I always try to pay it forwards. Therefore, and I know this sounds really twee, I couldn't name one individual person. I mean, obviously my wife and kids, it's just so, like anybody would say, so instructive now. But I think at every step that we have spoken about, whether it's school friends, whether it's people at Grays and Duty who took me under their wing and, showed me everything that I could possibly need to learn more about the human condition there, whether it was taking step into financial services and learning from the ground up again, or whether my business partner, Nikki, and showing me the ropes on what it means to be a founder. And by the way, special shout out, and I know this is going to sound really awful and I know you need to wrap up, but a huge shout out to the female founders out there. I'm a guy, I don't have the lived experience, but what I see from the additional pressures and demands that are placed upon, female founders out there doing it on their own, or even, blessed to be with other people, but huge respect, because I don't think that's spoken about enough, really, as to balancing home life is work. It's just everything seems to be amplified, and huge respect there. So anyway, long story short, too many people clearly to mention.
But you did a good job. You did a good
everybody.
job. And thank you for saying that about with the females, because I think the women listening to this will appreciate that. So because often they feel a little bit unseen, all that work. I mean, men do a great.
And I think it's so unrecognised, and it's even to like personal safety issues, and so thinking about lone working, and which in large organisations there's a policy for lone working, isn't there? There's a number to call, and there's a operation to do. But when you're out doing these things on your own and you're networking, and I just don't think it's recognised enough how tough those things are. But I'm also, as a guy, I'm probably not the best person necessarily to be saying it.
Well, I think it's great, lovely to be recognised, and I'm sure say that's very appreciated, very much so. Thank you. So for your hurdles and advice, and again, I'm very conscious of your time as well. Now, what would you say is the biggest hurdle that you have had to overcome?
Oh, without doubt, getting out of my own way. I mean, I think it is for so many people, but I think, so many of the obstacles we face in life, so many of the challenges, either of our own making or aren't there. Yeah. I know I say that with a degree of, I've had a stable background. I'm clearly upper, lower, middle class, all that kind of stuff. So I've had a lot of things given to me, perhaps that other people have had to fight for to get to the same start point. But I do think the biggest challenge by far, I think, is how would you have your own enough self-belief, enough self-confidence, as I mentioned before, the ability to zoom out sometimes, particularly on a really difficult day, and see things in context, perspective. This again sounds really twee, but I like that the analogy, the acronym of fear as false evidence appearing real. And it's how do you come past that? My mum and I were having a conversation the other day where I was reminded of the three phrases of is it true? Is it helpful? Is it kind?
Yeah. I mean, it's so simple but true.
So many blockers, I think, have been, in hindsight, entirely of my own making. Yeah. And I think probably that's the same for not everybody, but for a lot of people, it is realising that we can perhaps be the architects of our own destiny a bit more than we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah, I think it's true of pretty much everyone. I mean, we all have, and it's whether or not you overcome them, but we do absolutely all have these fears. And
we could have a whole nother episode of why I don't like the phrase imposter syndrome.
Oh, yes, I get that.
I don't know anyone that I've met in business life who has a syndrome.
No.
Yet we're happy to take it on.
Yeah.
Let's call it premature success.
Yeah, and it's all these don't get me started on the labels, and then it's minute you got a label, then that's a reason not to do it. And honestly, I'll be going on.
Self-belief, self-confidence, and backing yourself, I suppose.
Well, so on that note, and you have given some wonderful advice already, if the listener is listening to this and is thinking, I mean, it goes back to what you were saying as well, we do all have our own uniqueness, and it doesn't necessarily mean to say that you're going to set up your own business. It's not that necessarily. It might be that you want to apply for a new job or a different job, or move industries, or whatever that may be. But if we use the gardener as an example, if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, do you know what, I love gardening, but I've listened to what Chris has said, but I don't think it applies. I don't think that applies to me. I just don't think I could do it. I don't think I could put myself out there. I really don't think I could do it, because the idea of talking about myself and all, I just don't think I can do that. What would you say to that person as their first step to just move forward a little bit?
I mean, weirdly, but I think it is just take the first step. Yeah, I think that some people are very nervous about talking about themselves, happy to talk about, well, then go and talk about business to start with, hide your story for the first few months, whatever. Sadly, the truth is probably your personal story, your personal brand is kind of something that you need to loan to the business to start with. You need to kind of a transfer of equity from your personal brand to the business. So that is undeniably the best way forward. But if that thought scares you, because you are putting things on the line. I mean, that there's a kind of theory of procrastination, which is that sort of self-worth theory, where the things we find most important to us are the things we're most likely to put off, because it means so much, and therefore we procrastinate. So when we fail safely, because I couldn't possibly have done any better because I only had a week or I only did this. So it's a kind of psychological trick that we play upon ourselves. So I think the key thing is starting. I think if Mickey were here, she would probably say, just go and do it, throw all caution to the wind, go all feet in, just find out. I would probably say start a side hustle, think about how you can, experiment, find it out, start small and grow from there. But that's probably because I'm a little bit not risk averse, but I tend to want to balance things out. But just start. I think I'd better to maybe give it a go and find out whether it's going to work, rather than in 10 years' time look back and think, I wonder what might have happened if.
Yeah. And you say this as someone that's seen the very darker side of life, going right back to the beginning, and obviously you've got great empathy and you've met lots of different people, and it goes back to again what we were saying about how we are all really quite similar, even though the outside world may have changed, but we do all have a fear, I suppose, and to know that fear, you see it, don't you, that it's like what you say, it's having the fear but doing it anyway.
Yeah, and as I said, it's being, I mean, we might cover this off another time, and I know that if I was to have a personality test, I'd probably come out as far too agreeable, and that's not necessarily commercially prudent. But the thing I always kind of think is that a lot of stuff does start with kindness, I think. So, and that starts being kind to ourselves, and I think recognizing that the battle is different, because the battle is different, naming and owning that emotion, and I think it's easier to do it despite that feeling of fear, having recognized that it's fearful. And naming the fear and putting it out there. I think you can then act despite of it, because you've named it and you've owned it, and you almost begin, I think, strangely, to take control of it by owning it and naming it. Then you can challenge it. I think all the time it remains unstated and it's just out there as a blocker. I think you're less likely to overcome it. So
and I love that, because we do all feel it. We do absolutely. Oh, so good, Chris. That's, honestly, I could speak to you all day. I will ask you to come back, but I'm very conscious of your time now, because I go on for weeks. So, and very finally, so my mission with my books is to, which obviously I might have to change now. I might have to be a little bit clearer, but it's always been to write a book. When you see people around a swimming pool and they can't put that book down and they read it in a day, and I would love somebody to give that to my reader, that they can't put that down. What would you say is the book that you would have around a swimming pool that you wouldn't be able to put down?
So this is, and I apologise profusely to an author, by the way, because I feel that back in the day I did far too much study.
Oh, you put you
and
off.
What it does is, I think it robbed me from the joy of reading to some extent, and therefore most of the books that I absolutely love now are ones that predated.
Love that.
Because I think you just get so used to scanning and reading professionally, in inverted commas, which is very different from reading for joy. So the one I think going back to, because I still think it's so relevant, if not more so today, is something like Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. And I always think that that's kind of where we're in with all these AI tools at the moment, caught in this vortex between the more you use them. And so that one, the one that I am actually listening to rather than reading at the moment is, I think it's kind of called Die with Zero, I think. But it's just this sense of like this living giving, and how we can give away what we have while we're still here. And I think that's that concept, at least, of living giving. But I'm not a billionaire philanthropist.
Wow.
But far from it.
You'll probably be too agreeable. You'll be giving it all away anyway.
Right,
that's just the thing.
Absolutely. But I am quite, because I think from my mind, it is the book, but I think it's the concept, it's the idea, it's the thesis that I think really attracts me, because then you take the book and you leave the pages of the book, don't you?
Yeah.
And I think the best books are the ones that kind of like live off the page of where you've read, and it becomes part of about you and your life, and
absolutely,
your story, and therefore you begin to make your own chapters and characters within it.
And come on podcasts like this. Do you ever read fiction?
I'm blessed because I have the boys, and so I know it's probably very predictable, but the Harry Potters now, and Diary of a Wimpy Kid for the little ones, those kind of things. So I thoroughly enjoy reading, but most of my fiction now is for the boys, and there's a really shared passion for reading.
Yeah, you say for the boys. I bet you pick those up around the pool as well, and
I
quite
mean,
right as well.
they've all had every single Roald Dahl, I think now, probably even, I don't know whether it's come out of favour or not or whatever, but yes, I've thoroughly enjoyed revisiting all of those books from my youth as well.
Oh, amazing. Well, look, Chris, I've thoroughly enjoyed revisiting a
Likewise.
lot of your story. That's so incredible. I'm so sorry that our paths didn't cross at Bath, but I'm so glad they have crossed now. And I hope to speak to you many more times again. Chris Endersby, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for being such a wonderful guest on the next chapter.
Thank you for looking after me.